That's exactly what our kids who are at risk provide us in a school, is they are our canaries. They are the first to respond to lack of support or ineffective teaching and ineffective strategies. There may be a need for an individual assistance plan or services from other specialists. What do we do in the phase where kids start ramping up, they're becoming agitated, they're escalating? The first and most powerful thing you can do is to recognize it. If you don't see it, you can't intervene with it. So be aware of your students who are likely to escalate and what their typical style of escalation is. I would encourage you, if you have a student who has escalated into aggression, serious antisocial behavior, this needs to be a part of your evaluation, this needs to be a part of your records, is what does it look like? Not just the behavior at the peak, because we often describe the behavior at the peak without describing the behavior in the escalation. I want to know, what do they look like when they just become agitated? Yes, I know that they destroyed the classroom, punched the teacher, stabbed the kid next to him with a pencil. I want to know, how did it look as they were ramping up, as they were escalating? Then the issue is giving space and time. There's a couple of things that I would encourage. Giving space. Number one is, I believe in acknowledging it to the student. It looks like you're struggling. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to sort of, calm down a little bit. I'm going to be back with you. I'll be right back. I'm going to make sure everybody else has the things that they need, and then I'll come back and offer support. What can I do? What does it need? What's happening for you? Now, there are some things that I would say is, one, before you walk up to a student, look to see what potential weapons are on their desk or in their setting. A pencil can be a deadly weapon. Just a good kick or a good fling of the arm can wreak havoc. And so you need to be thinking about whether or not you're in their wheelhouse, as they say. Are you in striking distance? And I will oftentimes stay out of that way. I will also try to avoid as much as possible power positions. Intimidation and power positions. Marilyn, if you don't mind, I'm going to use you as a guinea pig. If I simply stand like this, it is a power position and it can be intimidating, and that alone can be enough to trigger behavior for some kids. What I will often do is I will try to get down at their level. For guys, I will try to turn just a little bit sideways, and I'll have that discussion with them. I'm just far enough from Helene that if she takes a good swing, she's probably going to miss me. Good kick, probably about the same thing. But I want to say, what do you need to support? And I'm here. I recognize that you're struggling. What can I do to support you? Preferred activities. There is a time when we want to decrease the triggers that we know. If the trigger has been a difficult assignment, have them back up to an assignment you know they can do, or a task you know they can do. Teacher proximity is important, but don't get in their face. This isn't the time. Independent movement and activities can be important, and if you've taught relaxation techniques, this might be a time to stimulate that. Now is not the time to teach them the technique, right? Prevention, prevention, prevention. I will tell you that when you get into the escalation cycle, you have one goal. This is not a learning opportunity. This is a chance for you to get everybody out safely. That's your goal. Because all of your systems up until now have failed at that level, and at the level that you're doing this, you're not going to make this. Look, I told you to get to work, and I know now's not the time to try to hold them accountable and all those things. Now's the time to de-escalate the situation so that everybody gets out safely. During acceleration, avoid escalating prompts. Maintain calmness. The maintaining calmness, I think, is one of the hardest things to do, and it is probably the single most important thing to do in my experience. If you escalate, your student will almost assuredly escalate. We actually read each other's neurological conditions, physiological conditions in a lot of different ways. We're not aware of some of them we are. If you put women together in a dormitory setting, what starts happening? They start cycling together, right? And that doesn't involve bicycles, but okay. So how does that happen? Because we monitor each other's physical state constantly. The best thing you can do is take a deep breath. I don't care what's going through your head. Look calm. They have an old saying, fake it till you make it, right? If it takes your best acting, Oscar-winning performance, stay calm. and stay calm in the way you deliver as well as the way you look. Okay. Crisis prevention strategies, exit paperwork. This is interesting. This is something that Hill and Jeff originally had in there, exit paperwork. There is a belief that you can sort of have some framework, some paperwork that you can sort of get them to work on to exit out of the cycle. It's not one I use. But some people say you can sort of debrief and move them out of it that way. Restore the environment as quickly as possible. If somebody's escalating and they're agitated, you want to get them back into a known, safe environment as quickly as possible. Return to the original activity and debrief. Again, I'm not a big one for debriefing at that point, but that's what's in the model. At peak, the only thing you're concerned about is safety. Focus on safety. At this point, you may use isolation, for example. Having a room-clear procedure trained and well-established before this happens is a very powerful tool for two reasons. Number one is if this behavior is at all maintained or supported by attention, you want to get the audience away. Number two, because this is a safety issue, you want to get the possibility of other students reduced by moving them out of the setting. So isolate the problem as much as you can. Do not allow one student to escalate all your students. Parent contact. Again, this is about knowing your student. Is there a chance during this that if you have another colleague that you're working with that offering to let them speak to a parent will calm them? That's fine. I'm okay with that for now. I'm okay with that for now only for one reason. Because after this, you're going to go back and review your plan and check and see if contacting a parent is a smart thing to do in the long term. It may, in fact, actually maintain escalated behavior. You just have to be careful. Short-term suspensions and restraints, I'm not going there. It's not one of my favorites. Long-term, you're going to look at doing an FBA, which is what we're going to talk about in just a minute. You might think about referrals to outside agencies and a policy review. This is a chance when this is done to say, how did we do? How did our plan work? By the way, you notice all this is about the adults, right? Our plans are about what we do. If we want students to demonstrate different behavior, we have to demonstrate different behavior. If you want student behavior to change, adult behavior has to change to get better. De-escalation, again, isolation may help, time to cool down, independent work, exit paperwork, restore environment, etc. If I'm going to break it down into some critical pieces, number one is be aware. Number two is offer support. And number three is focus entirely on calming and de-escalation from that point of view. I have to tell you, every time I've seen a situation escalate, it has had something to do with an adult who escalates the situation, not necessarily intentionally, but something they've done has moved them closer, the student closer to escalation rather than de-escalation. Part of this is, when we're done with this, we need to make sure that our plans and policies and procedures are effective prevention and intervention. Avoid making demands on students when they're in an agitated state. This is from one of Hill's later books with his wife Janet. Do not allow yourself to become involved in responding to a series of questions. The power struggle is one of the biggest escalators I've ever seen. It's like, I didn't do that, you did do that, I didn't do that, you did do that. Don't go there. This is not useful. They say, power struggle, don't engage in a power struggle. It's like mud wrestling with a pig. The pig will love it and you'll lose. You'll get dirty. Don't force the issue. There are actually a couple of videotapes that I think are actually kind of nice resources. Maybe you have it in your center or in your school district. They're both by Jeff Colvin, and they're both out of Iris Media, which is based in Eugene. I think you can get online and find Iris Media, and I can't remember. They have a funny website address, but there's a couple that you might see. And I think those are listed on there, although the black doesn't necessarily come through very well. Okay. We've talked a little bit about PBS and as a systemic approach and individual approaches through the escalation cycle. Let's talk about behavioral assessment. When you're talking about FBAs, FBA is in the context of the larger assessment question. Assessment is the process of collecting relevant information to answer important questions or make important decisions. 3 pieces. Number 1, relevant. I want to make sure that the information we're collected is directly relevant to what we're trying to accomplish. I've seen questionnaires of teachers, of families, etc., that are 30 and 40 pages long, talking about whether or not the child was breastfed and what age they walked at. I think we need to be very, very careful of that. The question is it relevant to what we're doing right now? There may be another setting or another reason for which that's relevant. But for the purpose of FBAs, I'm not going there. Information, data, or facts, something that can be recorded. I am very careful about passing along derogatory terminology or descriptions of students that I see in notes, and I see them all the time in records reviews. This student is lazy, this student is, and you see these descriptive words that don't, or these words that are not descriptive, they're very subjective. Okay, sources of information, we can talk records review, questionnaires, etc. There's some of these things I'm going to skip through. You can recognize them. Again, back to the question, is this mere gossip or curiosity? Can you explain to a parent why you're asking them this information, or to the teacher? How will this help the student? Definition of assessment is what? Collecting relevant information or data for the purpose of making good decisions or answering questions, making decisions. Okay. What's the difference between a test and an assessment? Yes.
Test usually has one right answer, and an assessment has many answers. There isn't one right one.
Yeah, testing is usually about one specific tool or strategy in a larger assessment process. And the same thing is true of FBAs. It's not just a questionnaire to the teacher or just an interview. It's a process of assessment. Okay, what is FBA and how do we do it? There's a couple of books that I just want to mention here that you might like to have as resources. One of them's been around for quite a while, and it is by Rob O'Neill, Rob Horner. Can you read that? Can you get out your magnifying glass? And the book is titled Functional Analysis of Problem Behavior. Functional Analysis of Problem Behavior. This is a very good basic primer on basic behavior analysis procedures, data collection, assessment procedures. The one on the right is by Deanne Crone and Rob Horner, and it really focuses very much on positive behavior support at the FBA level. Just a couple of resources. I guess I should back up. Who can tell me what the definition of an FBA is? An FBA is just something you do before the BIP. I love that answer. If you've got that right, it's like that FBA after the BIP just doesn't work, does it? Okay. And what are you doing before the BIP?
Observing, collecting data, information.
And what are you trying to get?
Behaviors, seeing what's the problem.
Okay. So one of them you said is what the problem is. You want to know what the problem is. What else? The function or what happens after, what maintains the behavior. Keep going. You're on a roll here.
When it happens, where it happens.
When it happens, where it happens, which are... That's the description piece, and then you talk about the antecedents and setting events. Good. So functional behavioral assessment is a process for identifying the events that reliably predict and maintain problem behavior. What comes before? Prediction. What comes afterwards? Maintenance. There's a lot of differences between traditional assessment and FBA. I'll let you have fun with those on your own. There is a difference. Everybody that I know that works with children has at some time or another done a very mini functional analysis or functional assessment, right? It's that piece of, I think he's just doing that to get my attention. Okay, you started. Thinking functionally is at one end of the spectrum. As we become more sophisticated, need to do more work, we move up to the mini FBA, where we just sit down and say, what do we all think is the function of the behavior? And you can start moving up beyond that to a mini FBA plus you start adding in observation. And you can go up to a full functional analysis where you're testing your hypotheses. What we're really talking about today is going to be not into the full functional analysis part of it. That really is usually in settings that are highly, highly controlled. I have a friend that worked at the Kennedy Institute, Kennedy Krieger. They had kids whose behavior was life-threatening. In those cases, and they have lots of control, in those cases you can do things differently than you can do in a school setting. In most cases, we're going to ask teachers to think functionally, and we're going to have the team do a mini or a full FBA plus an observation. That's generally where we look. Comes out of a history of applied behavior analysis. And one of the things they looked at was, we're not thinking about diagnosis, which tells us why the behavior is occurring. We're understanding that behavior has a function or a purpose. And typically, that means they obtain something, or they avoid or escape something. Why do we conduct an FBA? Because we want to enhance the quality of our interventions. There's some work by Kimberly Ingram and others that indicate that when we don't consider the results of our functional assessment or functional behavioral assessment, we're as likely to choose an intervention that increases problem behavior as decreases problem behavior. Now, I don't know about you, but if I've got a kiddo whose behavior is very challenging, very stressful, very disruptive, the last thing I want to do is create an intervention, spend a lot of time creating an intervention that actually makes things worse. If we don't make the link between the FBA and the behavior support plan or behavior intervention plan, the chances are equal that we increase behaviors, decrease it. We also want to respond systematically in situations that can be destabilizing. In the middle of a crisis, it can be very destabilizing to try to be thinking, what should I do now? I have no idea what's going to happen, have no idea what to do. What we need to do is set up plans in advance of those crises, and of course we need to meet legal and ethical requirements. Whoop. The ethical perspective specifically on FBAs is that looking at the environmental cues that control behavior is more of an evidence-based approach. But the one I want to focus on is this piece here at the bottom. It is more respectful of students to talk about how their behavior is responsive to the environment in which they are operating. Now, some people say, well, yeah, but a lot of kids are behaving just fine in that situation. Well, for them, that situation isn't triggering inappropriate behavior. But for some kids, I want you to understand when they come to school, they're walking into a battle zone. For them, it may not be your perception. You may think it's calm, quiet, effective, but for them, they're walking into a place that is unsafe. And we need to look at it as best we can through their eyes. Okay. When should an FBA be conducted? Yes?
I understand that concept, but then it's also taking the responsibility off of the child for whatever choice they make. I mean, it's their choice to react to a certain stimulus.
Is it?
It is. It really honestly is. Now, whether or not that's a scheme that they learn to do, that's their natural recourse. You're still making a choice. Am I going to follow my natural recourse, or are there other options available that I can choose?
So let me respond to that in a couple of different ways. Number one is, think about a student who has one tool in their toolbox. I mean, we always had this thing about everything looks like a nail if the only tool you have is a hammer. Imagine the kid who comes in kindergarten. He sees that Helena's got the red ball he wants. He walks up, kicks her in the shin, she drops the ball, he walks away with it, and you say, you didn't make a good choice. If he's never seen another behavior, an alternative to kicking in the shins, something that uses aggression and violence, there isn't another choice. Another example that moves up and becomes more sophisticated. Let's take a student that we say, we want you, if you disagree with a colleague or a classmate or whatever, if you disagree, we want you to work it out peacefully. If that student has no role models for problem solving, anger management, impulse control, and those kinds of things, it's not a choice. There has to be options in the toolkit. Does that make sense? Because if there isn't another option, it's not a choice. If it doesn't vary, it's not a variable. The next piece of it is, if the way for them to be most successful is to use inappropriate behavior, they will use inappropriate behavior. And that is sometimes about us. For example, I think that the number one thing students want when they come to school is they want validation, approval, acceptance. They want relationship. Now, in many cases, that's with us as adults. In some cases, as they get older, it starts shifting more and more to their peers. If that's what they need to do in order to survive, and some of the kids that we work with are on survival mode, then simply saying they made a choice is like saying, well, you made a choice to come up above the water to get air. I wanted you to stay below the water. That made sense. And everybody else has their scuba pack on. Part of this is that what functions for them. What needs are they trying to be met? In many cases, what we're talking about is meeting their learning needs. In many cases with our red zone kids, they're talking about survival. While you're talking about math, they're talking about what does it take for me to survive and be safe, because many of our kids in the red zone, in fact, are experiencing survival issues. Life is a threat. If you take, for example, kids with behavior disorders, externalizing behavior disorders, they are notoriously bad judges of reading the other. So I walk up to Helene, I look at her. If her face is hostile, if her posture is hostile, she will read that accurately as hostile. Here's the interesting thing. If it is neutral, I will often read it as hostile or aggressive, posing me a threat. Kids are in that behavior disordered range tend to more likely to perceive threat where threat doesn't exist, or we would say threat doesn't exist. So while we're talking, they are making choices, they're making choices on a whole plane that we're not even aware of, which is that survival issue. And I think we need to be very careful about how we see that, how we take a look at that and understand that. Imagine walking into a place where you thought people were there to hurt you, and you had to be there for several hours every day. Many of our kids who are in the upper ranges of behavior disorders do have some of that experience. I'm not going to tell you that kids don't make choices. Of course they do. The question is, can we help them make choices that are better choices? Can we give them more choices to make and help them see the consequence? A lot of kids, I worked in the juvenile justice system in Southern California for a while as an undergrad, and one of the things that was clear to me was kids never saw the issue of the relationship between behavior or choice and consequence or outcome. They didn't get it. And in fact, you'll see this in schools where you ask the kid who's in the green zone, who's a solid, squared away kid, and you go, why did you just get in trouble? I screwed up, I didn't do my homework, or I screwed up, I didn't do this. You ask the behavior disordered kid, and what are they liable to respond with? I don't know, or because you hate me. The teacher doesn't like me. It's about me. It's personal. It's between them and me. There's a whole different set of contingencies at play there. So when should it be conducted? When it's significantly different from classmates. When you walk into a room and you're being asked to do an FBA, take a look at that student in the context of the classroom. If the class is out of control, and you can't tell which student is the behavior disordered student from the rest. This sounds funny. You might have seen this. It's not an FBA issue, right? The student needs to be significantly different from their peers. If they're not, it's probably a larger systems issue. It's when behavior significantly impacts the learning or the adjustment of self or others. Standard interventions have failed. We were talking about RTI earlier. When good universal interventions have failed and good secondary prevention interventions have failed, then we move up into that tertiary level, or things like FBAs. Behavior is serious, persistent, a threat to safety, likely to result in significant disciplinary action, or disciplinary action has already occurred. Yes?
If you have a student who's significant disciplinary, whatever you call it, they got kicked out or suspended, then how do you do the FBA? And is it our responsibility, like if we had a student that got moved to another placement, is it our responsibility to do it, or the new placements?
You're asking two questions from what I hear. Number one is there's a policy decision as to who does the FBA. You need to find out in your system who does it. I've seen districts where when the move happens, they will come and assist, and I've seen some when you change placements, all bets are off. You're on your own in the new placement. So I would encourage you to ask administrators above you, who's expected to do this? Is the placement in our district, out of our district? Is it some of those things?
Okay, wait, but there's a part 2 to that.
Okay.
It may or may not be in our district, but we are a co-op, and
Okay.
I would assume it would not, they would be moving outside of our co-op, but perhaps still within our district. So then would I have to ask both?
Any situation where there is a change of placement, make sure that you have somebody at the top who's saying, whose responsibility is that? Now,
I'm asking which top though, the district or the co-op?
you want to know from your system. If you're in the co-op system and you've been part of this, if the change of placement is inside the co-op, a lot of times, or intermediate service district, whatever you want to call it, a lot of times it will stay inside that framework. But you want to know inside your system, and that's not a question I can answer because I've seen that even in one state. I've seen that differ from location to location who's responsible for doing the FBA. My guess is that if you were to offer to help whoever the receiving district is, you're probably not going to get a lot of problem or complaints about that. But I'm not going to, I don't want to be the one to say this is who should be dealing with that. That's an interagency agreement issue. That's a placement issue. That's a policy issue. How to do the FBA, if you know how to do it and offering it's a nice thing. But it may move, change of placement may move them to a different school psychologist, a different team, a different set of people responsible for the FBA.
What if they've been suspended and we don't know if they're coming back?
Wow, if this is a special education and they've been suspended, you know, that question has to come up with the IEP team. It has to come up with a manifestation determination. There should be a whole process going on with regard to that. A student who's just been suspended and we're not sure whether they're coming back, that's a legal issue that I don't, you know, if you're talking exclusion, not coming back as in going somewhere else, that's a change of placement, that's an IEP team decision. If you're not on the IEP team, you need to ask the people on the IEP team, where's this student going? Is there going to be a change in placement, a change in program? Yep. Yeah.
What if you have a child that's been placed outside the district, but they say that the program meets their needs? Legally, do you have to have a behavior plan? Because many times when we place children outside of our district, they say, oh no, we don't need that because our program addresses their needs.
Here is my understanding of the legal issue. If a student changes placement, it does not necessarily change program unless the IEP team determines that the program it needs to be changed.
Okay, let's say if the program, they go to an ED program.
That's a placement issue. Don't think about this in terms of place. The law says nothing about place. It says nothing about program. It says placement, and the program is not a place. A program is the set of services and supports. Right? There's three parts of an IEP, right? There's eligibility, is the student eligible for services? Number two is what's the program that the student needs? That's not like Joe's room as a program. It's talking about what are the supports and services that are needed, and then where is the placement, best, most appropriate, least restrictive environment to deliver that program. Simply changing to another place does not alleviate the responsibility to follow an IEP. The IEP is a legal document. It is a contract. It needs to be followed until it's changed. So simply saying the student no longer needs it is not going to do anybody any good, because what can then happen is the parent or the guardian or the student later on can come back and say, hey, I had an IEP. I had a contract with you guys. You didn't live up to it. The IEP must be changed if there is a change in any of those three. Does that answer? Okay. Okay. I want to also mention that FBA is not well suited to a couple of things that can be severe, but it's still inappropriate, and that is low frequency or covert behaviors. You cannot do an FBA on school shooting. If something occurs once, you're not going to see a pattern.
But you have to do an FBA because it's a weapon in the school and it's a change of placement to an alternative placement. We've been there, done that.
Not exactly. You have to do it on aggressive behavior. You will probably need to do a threat assessment. There are a lot of things, but the FBA on a situation that is once only behavior, FBA is not going to work.
What about behavior that's happening in unsupervised, like on the bus?
Okay.
Where collection of data is going to be difficult because what you're getting are...
So the question is, what about behavior that's occurring in a setting that is unsupervised or relatively unsupervised, or where data collection is going to be difficult? The law doesn't tell you that difficulty is an out. I mean, if the behavior requires an FBA, it requires an FBA no matter, you know, the bus and the bus driver's got his back to the kids and there's 80 of them on the bus. You've got to find a way to collect the information you need in order to develop the hypothesis and move into behavior support planning. However, if that behavior is a covert behavior, if it's behavior that is hard to see, hard to measure, even if you're there, that's a whole different issue, and that's not something FBA does a very good job at. It is more appropriate for overt behaviors. Yes.
I am in 100% agreement with you. However, I have spent the last year talking with our district attorneys and so on and so forth. A simple example of what you're talking about is, according to our attorneys, by law, we have to do an FBA. If it's, I'll be real honest with you, this was a special education student who was having sex in the back of the bus.
Okay.
And they were suspending him for over 10 days. It was a ridiculous thing that was happening, but
Yes.
again, this was a one-time thing. I mean, immediate gratification is probably the function of the behavior. However, an FBA had to be completed in order for you to...
So there's two things. One is that's not necessarily so much a covert behavior. It can be seen and observed, right? Somebody probably saw it and observed it.
Yes.
Okay? The other piece of that is it low frequency? And the question may come back to that incident escalating to sexual intercourse may be low frequency. Can you back up and talk about sexually inappropriate behavior? So he may have been, you know, pulling things that were a lot lower on the spectrum, and that may have happened many times. It is better to go back and not FBA intercourse, but to FBA on the issue of inappropriate sexual behavior.
And that's what was attempted, and there was nothing that was reported, observable, mentioned, investigated prior to that incident. So,
Well, and that kind of goes back to your question, what if you don't have the ability to do it? Let me tell you what an attorney friend of mine said. If you end up in a problem situation because of problem behavior, there's going to be two things that the attorneys are going to go for. Number one is, show me your supervision schedule, and number two is, show me your training schedule for staff. If you have behavior going on that rises to the level that you're willing to pay X $100 an hour to talk to an attorney, and you're not paying an instructional assistant or somebody to supervise in that setting, it's a better use of your money to find a way to get supervision. When we're talking about school-wide behavior, one of the things that's interesting to me is how many times kids know about supervision gaps. And they can tell you, particularly our middle school and high school students can say, hey, if you want to get in trouble, here's where to do it. You want to know where a joint is? Here's the place, the guy to buy the joint. You want to know where to smoke it? I'll tell you where to smoke it. We actually had students that could tell us very descriptively what the supervision patterns were of the adults on campus at a middle school. They said, Mrs. So-and-so will come out this door. She will stand and talk to so-and-so. She'll walk this way in a perfect circle around the playground, and then she'll come back and she'll walk in. So all we have to do is when she comes out the door, we follow her over, we go left when she goes right, and that's where things happen. They know where this is. One of the reasons why I strongly encourage when you're doing your positive behavior support, your school-wide piece, is to have students on your team. They know things that can help support your behavior support planning. Okay? Again, we want to say, do we have that school-wide PBS system in place? Is it working in the classroom? And have we considered alternative medical or physical causes? Just a quick little anecdote. There was a second grade teacher, maybe third grade teacher, I can't remember right offhand now, who was having escalating fidgeting behavior with this student. She said when he first came at the beginning of the year, he would sit and he'd do his work and all these things, and he's now started fidgeting more and more, and he's standing up, he pops up, he sits down, he's doing all these motions. And so the teacher called mom in and said, I'm really concerned about what's going on here. We're thinking maybe that there's something neurological or medical. We'd like you to take him to his pediatrician. Take a look, see what's going on. So parent came back the next day with her son, dropped him off at school and said, I think things will be better now. The student was so on track. It was like back to the beginning of the year. Things were so squared away. He was not fidgeting at all. The teacher was so stunned by this, she called the mom in the afternoon and said, did you get him on medication? What was this all about? I kid you not, the mom said, his underwear were too tight. I mean, that sounds silly. But sometimes we have to rule out the smaller things. For example, the kid that's got visual issues